The Right Church, From a Seeker to a Finder, written by Peter Hoover of Ontario, Canada, in the late 1970s, published in 2021 by Metamorphose Publishing of Waynesboro, Pennsylvania, USA. Epilogue. The original text of this book was completed before I married Susan Weber-Kron in 1981. Now the last chapters include events that happened later. They also reflect the position that I have come to through trial and error, through living in all four hemispheres in numerous countries through the last 40 years. For instance, although the story of my baptism involves elements of what happened in Canada in the 1970s, it also reflects what took place later in New Zealand, where I was baptized by immersion. The same is true of my church fellowship. The story describes much of what happened in Canada, but it also more specifically describes our current fellowship in Pennsylvania. To make it easier to follow, I pulled the whole story together into one. Even this, with all the butchering I did with the text, deliberately to make it less obvious who is who and what was what, I am sure some of you may identify the characters and what they did or said. That is all right, but I am not interested in revealing more personal details publicly than what you may read right here in this book. Is that okay? What took place, the whirlwind amongst us in southern Ontario during the 1970s, was not always nice. We have some painful memories, and it is time for us to leave them behind. But as in the accounts of the children of Israel and the early Christians, or all other biographical material produced since, we may sometimes profitably look back, reflect, and learn. That is my hope in publishing this book. I feel sorry for all young Christians who find themselves in the wrangling and tangling of ecclesiastical divisions during so-called cultural wars. Hardly anything good comes out of them. But no matter where life begins, whether in Canada, in Switzerland, in Afghanistan, or Chile, or Côte d'Ivoire, one can always find the rock of truth, the living rock on which one may build in courageous peace. One of my biggest struggles as a teenager involved our beautiful and prosperous family farm. As the youngest boy in the family, my parents took for granted that I would take it. Why not? I would never have as good a chance again. As you must have observed, I turned down the offer. That did not go smoothly, but in the end, we all finally agreed it was the right decision. I would have never turned out to be a good Ontario Mennonite farmer. Regarding education, with a mere high school diploma, I taught school and became involved with publishing in several languages during most of my adult life. This included teaching school in English in Canada, the US and Australia, German in Mexico, and Spanish in Latin America. My strangest job ever was to teach in a Roman Catholic high school in San Jose, Costa Rica, where I needed to help over 700 unruly students to behave themselves while a priest came for Mass, every 2 weeks. Because I did not cross myself, nor pound my chest, and take part in the liturgy, one of my teenage students whispered loudly during Mass, "Teacher, are you even Catholic?" I shook my head, no, and smiled. Later, I explained to him what I believed. Privileges of sharing the witness of Christ abounded in those years, both while I taught in the high school and during evening classes in a language school linked with the University of Costa Rica. An untold number of faces still pop up in my mind, causing me to wonder and pray. The high schoolers had all amounts of aspirations, and those at the college studied medicine, political science, engineering, aeronautics, chemistry, and much more. Some of my students hoped to become stewardesses, or nurses, or foreign diplomats, or priests. What happened to them? We're all in this together, trying to figure out life. I remember many of my students fondly, as well as my co-teachers. Some came from Cuba, others from Chile, or Spain, or Mexico, or from other Latin American republics. Did I ever complete my own education? Oddly, I passed my entrance exam and started studying at the University of Waikato in Hamilton North, New Zealand. But by that time my values had shifted. Other things demanded my attention, and I dropped out. 3 of my sons have pursued tertiary education, but my feelings on the subject by now are mixed. Like Costa Ricans put it, there are no limits to ignorance. Neither do I share the old order Mennonite idea that higher education automatically produces proud people. Some of the haughtiest people I have met seem to know the least. When old order Mennonites have accidents or turn sick, they seem happy enough to use doctors and professional nurses. When they look for cars to buy, they tend to choose the ones best engineered. And who wants to get onto a plane whose designer has not studied aeronautics? There is no premium on ignorance, but any education that misses the knowledge of the holy falls short of what humans need to know. Sometimes I have needed to work with highly educated people who had not figured out how to live. On the other hand, I have worked closely and been deeply inspired by utterly illiterate people who knew God and who knew infinitely much more than I on how to survive with nothing more than the basics. In far southern Belize, I spent one whole day with a young Kayakshi brother called Thomas. He knew some Spanish and a few words of English, so between the two languages and with simple gestures, he led me deep into the jungle. With his machete, he constantly cleared the trail, a winding, dimly lit tunnel under the dense vegetation. He insisted I needed to wear rubber boots, best protection for snakebite. Unfortunately, the biggest boots he could find were 1 or 2 sizes too small, and the trail he chopped was too low for me to walk totally upright. After about an hour's walk, we stepped out into a slash and burn plot where I looked up to the tallest corn stalks I had ever seen. This sounds like a fable, but I had to bend over the stalks to grab the lowest ears of corn. Once we had 2 large hemp bags full of corn, Thomas slashed out 2 long strips of a certain bark that does not easily rip. In a few swift maneuvers, he turned them into loops that allowed him to lift the bags onto our backs, and presto, I found myself walking back through the jungle, bent forwards with a huge load on my back, sustained by the wide bark strap around my forehead. The way people transported things in this part of the world since time immemorial. I liked the load on my back, and since we could not communicate much anyway, we both trudged along steadily, silently, in single file, with the whole dripping rainforest singing and croaking and snapping around us with the sense of Eden coursing through our veins. During the month of August 1982, in which Susan and I traveled through Mexico to assist a refugee back into his war-torn Guatemalan town, we learned from Canada that my Grandpa Stoner had died. I shed tears for him. I had always liked him, and we had spent so much time together, he and I, especially in my early teens. We worked together in a pallet shop. He was a great storyteller, and as soon as we found ourselves alone, he would stoke up the fire, pull out a crate to sit on, and start to talk. I still treasure those times. I also credit my grandpa, whom many shrugged off as an eccentric, for the fact that our family did not go with the flow. All the old order Mennonite communities along the lakes, all 6 of them, died out and evaporated into their surrounding Canadian society during the 1960s and 70s. My dad, like my grandpa, carried strong personal convictions that he tried to implement, not always successfully, in a variety of church situations of which he was a leader. As a teenager, I came to realize that some of his ideas were probably impractical and perhaps even mistaken, but I learned to respect and love him nevertheless, not only because of what he said or did, but much more because of his unfailing zeal for God and his love of gospel truth. Both my parents spent their remaining days in Canadian care homes in town. After marrying a Russian Mennonite girl, I found it necessary to learn her Platt-Deutsch language. She was born in Western Canada, but we first lived next to her parents in Chihuahua, Mexico, and from there we moved to Central and South America. Later we spent time in New Zealand and lived in Australia, where most of our children grew up and started their own families in Christian community. Randy continues to be my friend. We got married the same year, and although our communication has suffered huge gaps, whenever we get together, our conversations continue without a hitch, in spite of cultural diversity. On a trip to Canada in 2015, I managed to visit old Rudolf Weinhardt at an urban care home shortly before he died. I lost contact with Jacques Villeneuve after he returned to Quebec, but the community he so earnestly promoted in the 1970s, now known as Epilogue, has expanded into more than 150 branches in 38 countries around the world. The connections I made with the Society of Friends, now known as the Bruderhof, in America and England in the 1970s, have kept right on growing, allowing us to spend time with their communities in America, Europe, and Australia. Art Gish, writer of Beyond the Rat Race, became a valued friend, and we corresponded until his fatal accident in 2010. My relationship with the German Baptists, the River Brethren, and the Holdeman Mennonites, all established during my teen years in the 1970s, have survived, and I treasure a large number of friends in all of these groups. In Mexico, I still considered joining the Holdeman Mennonites and became friends of the extensive Henry Cohn family. A German Baptist doctor, Ruben Hess, correctly diagnosed my life-threatening illness in 2020 and got me onto the road of recovery. At the same time, we live in highly valued fellowship with the River Brethren here at Franklin County, Pennsylvania. In Canada, a handful of my relatives and friends, most of them elderly, still meet at Alan Miller's church on Sunday mornings. Their conference has amalgamated with others to become the Mennonite Church of Eastern Canada, and the last I heard, they are sharing their pulpit with the pastor of a Dutch Reformed church nearby. Many things have happened since Menno Simons died. While moving from Canada to Mexico in 1981, we spent a weekend at the home of Jay Winfield and Marguerite Fretz at North Newton, Kansas, where they now lived. Frank Epp died in Canada 5 years later. Ethan and Dane both got married and have grown families of their own, along with a rapidly growing number of grandchildren. All of them, as far as I know, follow the way of Christ. Jeff Powell also got married, and untold numbers of his students still value his kind and inspiring approach to education. It was fun to learn from him. It was he who taught me how to edit my writings. There is no such thing as good writing, he told me, nothing but good rewriting. Oscar and Roswitha Bear finished their productive life in British Columbia, and I remain permanently indebted for what I learned from him. In the end, they belonged to an urban Mennonite Brethren congregation in Vancouver. I caught my last glimpse of Andreas Strauss while I sailed past their unusual house along the freeway. He was walking alone, carrying a bag in the no-man's land between the traffic and the mesh fence behind him. What was he doing there? I knew that Andreas's parents, German Lutherans who had faithfully baptized their little boys as infants, had separated. The Third World War never came, but their lives had fallen apart anyway. My heart went out to him, and to all others like him. Disoriented young people, jaded adults, members of old well-established Christian denominations that leave a wake of discouraged and even cynical adults behind them. Seekers of truth who have gotten tired of never finding what they really wanted, little more than the grim sets of rules, religious politics, and constantly shifting internal strife. Seekers like my distant relative, Aldine Kiefer of Dayton, Virginia, who finally scrapped all earthly reality and turned his longing eyes to the great beyond. As a boy, coming back along the bush lane with our cows on a summer evening, my oldest sister taught me Aldine Kiefer's song. Twilight is falling over the sea, shadows are stealing dark on the lea. Born on the night winds, voices of yore come from the far-off shore. Far away, beyond the starlit skies, where the love light never, never dies, gleameth a mansion filled with delight, sweet happy home so bright. Voices of loved ones, songs of the past, still linger round me while life shall last. Lonely I wander, sadly I roam, seeking that far-off home. Come in the twilight, come to me, bringing some message over the sea, cheering my pathway while here I roam, seeking that far-off home. Far away beyond the starlit skies, where the love light never, never dies, gleameth a mansion filled with delight, sweet, happy home so bright. Dreaming like Aldine Kiefer of far-off shores beyond the starlit skies, I conjured up fantastic scenes in my mind and came to love them. What would heaven be like? The sky is the limit with human imagination, especially if blessed with a schoolboy's active brain. Lonely I wander, sadly I roam, seeking that far-off home. Years later, in a tropical night with my wife, our children, and one of my sisters, we sang that song on the shores of Veracruz. The ocean roared in the darkness where, on our far left, we could make out the twinkling lights of San Juan de Ulloa, the Spanish fortress where Don Hernan Cortes launched his conquest of Mexico in 1519. Reality or a dream? It took me years to realize that my relative's lovely song involved a fair amount of fantasy. I actually began to study that fantasy, both in my own experience and in that of others. Why should humans seek to escape reality, only to pin their hopes on things they have conjured up in their minds? Why exchange reality with either urban legend or religious myth? There must be a reason. Born to Dunker and Mennonite parents, his mom being a descendant of the renowned Bishop Henry Funk, Aldine Kiefer grew up in a lukewarm and divided Anabaptist environment. As a 20-year-old, he joined the 10th Virginia Infantry Regiment at the beginning of the American Civil War, fighting for the South. Aldine apparently saw action at Bull Run, Jackson's Valley, 7 Days Battle, Cold Harbor, Fredericksburg, Manassas twice, and more. During the bloody battle at Antietam, he, fortunately, was on guard duty, but in Gettysburg his battalion was back in the thick of the fray and many of his companions fell. All told, 269 young men of the 10th Regiment lost their lives, all of them coming from Shenandoah, Rockingham, Page, and Madison counties of Virginia under the majors Isaac G. Kaufman and Joshua Stover. Anything surprising about the fact that Aldine suffered an alcohol addiction after the collapse of the Confederacy? Life on earth seemed useless to him and wrong, but he turned eventually to the Lord. Even then, he struggled with his addiction. Music helped him a lot. Towards the end of his life, he seems to have overcome his problems most of the time and wrote dozens of songs of his own, all in shaped notes. When his friends and family set up a grave marker for Aldine S. Kiefer, 1840 to 1904, at Dayton, Virginia, they carved these words into the stone. Humanity was made better by his life. Was that true? I pray for all seeking souls, all veterans like my grandpa's cousin, and the veterans of all wars fought ever since, physical, emotional, and spiritual wars, with eternity at stake. This book tells only a small part of the seeking I have done, particularly as a teenager, and I hope that my life as a mature person will demonstrate not only what I have sought, but what I have found. Some personal conclusions. A Christian's salvation does not depend on where he or she was baptized, nor by whom. A Christian's membership and undivided loyalty belongs to Christ, not to his church. Christians are to be the bride of Christ. For a Christian to marry a church is a same-sex marriage and God hates it. Unconditional loyalty to a church quickly becomes idolatry, ecclesialatry, and leads to spiritual death. But unconditional loyalty to Christ leads to lasting unity amongst believers. Unity is a gift from God, not something to fight for. Therefore, loyal to Christ and to his Spirit within, real Christians cannot be unconditionally loyal to any human organization, to any human government, or to any other fad, cause, or creed. Instead, real Christians submit themselves to those who submit themselves to Christ. 1 Corinthians 11:1. What happens then? Those who know Christ and who are known by him find themselves built as living stones into one glorious structure, one city of refuge, safe and secure on the rock that is Christ. There I want to belong to Christ Jesus and to his right church forever. Footnotes. 1. In real life, my grandfather was Menno Hoover, 1889 to 1982. In my fictionalized account, I used the name Stoner since he and I were also Stoner descendants. 2. Plattdeutsch, the experts now say, is not a German dialect. It is a Prussian language even older than the current national language of Germany, High German. 3. Before he died, Art Gish told me on the telephone that whatever I wish to do with Beyond the Rat Race, I have his wholehearted permission and blessing. We'll see what happens. 4. God is not far away, Acts 17:2. No one has ever seen God, because God is spirit, John 4:24. God can speak from a human body, like he does in Jesus. He has also appeared as an angel, Genesis 22:11, and he can speak through animals like Balaam's donkey, or through plants like the burning bush, or through geography like storms or Mount Sinai. Humble men and women never limit their concept of God, of the heavens, or of eternity. Only the childlike will ever enter the kingdom of God. Mark 10:15.